welcome to Ministry Mondays with Meg. I'm Meg. I am Reverend Meg Biddle, and I currently serve at the American Baptist Home Mission Societies in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. I'm the national coordinator for Ministry Life and the American Baptist Personnel Services, as you may know it, as ABPS. And I have been serving in this capacity for about 2 years. Ministry Mondays is supposed to be about just having a conversation with folks who are serving in ministry and what ministry is like today. Joining me today is my new friend, Reverend Paul Schneider. Paul, thanks so much for joining me.
Glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Would you tell everybody a little bit about who you are, what you do?
Sure. My name is Paul Schneider, and I am the pastor of Burien Community Church in Burien, Washington. I am the office administrator for the Evergreen Association of American Baptist Churches, which is the region up here in the Seattle area to which Burien Community Church belongs, along with 63 others. And I am the co-founder of Hope Punk Theology, along with the Reverend Mindy Welton Mitchell, which is something that we started together just about 2 years ago now, and is an online Facebook group where we carry on discussions about the genre of Hope Punk and how that can influence and affect our theology, and what that means in practical terms. And also I am the founder and director of the Oasis Project, which is an interfaith ministry of presence at conventions, usually science fiction and fantasy conventions, but conventions in general.
So you are an incredibly busy person. When do you sleep, really?
I do better these days than I did when I was going through school. So,
okay, all right. So I didn't even ask you this earlier. Is your church then? Is it a full-time thing? Are you 3/4 time?
I'm actually half-time with Burien.
You're half-time. Okay.
Yeah. So,
and
full-time with Evergreen,
okay.
half-time with Burien. And my other ministries are ones that work in around the edges, as it were.
Okay. How does your church feel about all of your ministries and you being accessible? I know sometimes that's a concern for churches when their pastors are multi-vocational.
I started with Burien as the interim, and when they brought me on, they could only bring me on for 10 hours a week. And I was pretty direct with them that 10 hours a week was a sermon in emergencies, right? Like that's the service, the planning that goes into it, and if somebody dies, that kind of thing. And I was able to hold that boundary fairly well during the time that I was 10 hours a week. When there was a change in the financial situation for the church, and they decided to bring me on at 20 hours a week. And I said, okay, so what are those 20 hours? Let's be clear. And so my church, is able to reach out to me and everything, but they understand. Before I was working for Evergreen, I was working in distribution as my primary job, and that would often be 50 hours or more a week that I was doing that. And I'm pretty careful about making sure that I give Burien the full 20, and there are some weeks that take a little more, and usually I make the next week lighter to sort of compensate for that.
Well, I'm glad that your church has been flexible with this. Are they generationally, do they fit into these other ministries where you serve? I mean, I know at the region level, that's an American Baptist thing, but are they folks that follow things like hope punk theology?
I've had a couple of church members attend the Hope Punk theology gatherings, and but I don't believe any of them are regular con goers or that kind of thing, or at least not to the conventions that the Oasis has been serving at so far. Mindy Welton, the Reverend Mindy Welton Mitchell, who I started the Hope Punk Theology gathering with, was pastor of Berean Community Church before I was. And so they kind of are doubly connected to it in that way. So we got a lot of people who were participating more initially and kind of do so when they're available now, and that kind of thing.
Gotcha. I didn't realize the Mindy connection there. That's fantastic. And she has just left the Evergreen region to go and serve in the frozen tundra of Wisconsin.
Right.
So how fantastic. Well, I mean, I love that they've at least checked it out and they're supportive of you in all your endeavors, it sounds like.
I was doing the Oasis ministry before I moved up to Washington State. I'm originally from Oakland, California, and was raised in the First Baptist Church of Berkeley. I'm a graduate of what is now the Berkeley School of Theology. It was still the American Baptist Seminary of the West when I got my degree. And the Oasis project was actually my master's project for the seminary. It was my final project as I was graduating seminary. So
That's fantastic. So let's start with that. Let's talk about this Oasis for Conventions and
sure.
what it is and what you do.
So around the time that I started going to seminary, I had been attending conventions, comic book conventions, game conventions, science fiction and fantasy conventions since I was a small kid. But I started staffing these conventions, actually working there. And you know how it is when you're actually working in a place, you kind of get to see behind the scenes a little bit more. There are things that you notice that you never saw before. And of course, being in seminary, one of the things that I was kind of deeply keyed into was, where and how does this part of who I am fit into ministry? And what I saw was that there were people who were having moments of spiritual crisis or of just being overwhelmed at these conventions. And it could be for a variety of reasons, something very sort of practical, something that, happened in a relationship and they're just dealing with the fallout. Or it could just be kind of suddenly realizing that you have more community than you ever thought you did. And that can be overwhelming. And so, but there was nowhere within the convention for someone to be able to step away and be able to process what they were going through. And so I said, well, maybe that's a void I can fill. And so I created an Oasis room just a couple of nights at the convention as just a quiet space for people to be able to step into. And ultimately it developed into a whole thing where we actually operate for the majority of a convention, and it's become an interfaith group. And so we staff it with clergy, and that way people who are stepping into that space can step into a space where it's pretty sensory light, not totally silent, but it is quiet. They can find things that are distractions if they need them, or they can just sit quietly and stare out the window. And for those who are experiencing a moment of spiritual crisis, we have a team of clergy on hand who can help them with this. The Reverend Dr. Peter Clark of blessed memory was one of my teachers in pastoral care at the seminary. And he pointed out that that a convention is not all that dissimilar from a pilgrimage, right? In a pilgrimage, you leave your house, you travel a long distance, you have a religious experience, and then you go home. Well, in a convention, you leave your home, you travel somewhere, you have an otherworldly experience, and then you go home. And the difference is that generally for a pilgrimage, when you get to the place where you have that experience, there's all kinds of people there who speak the language that you need to in order to help you process that experience. So it can be overwhelming and all of that, but there are people there who are able to help you. And they're just, I didn't see those at the conventions. And so that was kind of where the genesis of Oasis was. And what we try and do is to help people to have that space to be able to step away and then process things and then be able to rejoin the convention and enjoy themselves.
Well, as a parent of a child who actually attends those conventions, I'm grateful that that's even an option for some of those. So are you all over the US? Are you more on the West Coast?
We've been on the West Coast. My initial idea for the model, pie in the sky, as it were, would be to have teams that were sort of geographically located where if somebody was having a convention and they wanted an Oasis team, then we'd have people who are comparatively local who would be able to work with that convention. Right now, it's mostly West Coast based, but actually this year I was asked by the World Science Fiction Convention, which is happening in Chicago over Labor Day weekend, over that long weekend. I was asked to help design and implement their safer spaces and their sensory light or quiet room. And so that's really exciting. The World Science Fiction Convention happens at different places all around the world, obviously. But it's the convention that gives out the Hugo Awards, which are kind of like the biggest awards in science fiction.
Okay. Now, obviously, there's the cost of your time and travel. Is there a cost for you to set up a booth there? Is that something that's absorbed by the convention?
It depends on the convention. We've worked it both ways. When I was initially proposing this idea, I kind of ate all of the costs. We ask conventions to partner with us. Worldcon, for example, is providing the spaces. I still have to pay for my own hotel room and my travel and so on, but that's not anything that the other staff members of that convention, they're doing the same kind of things. So
gotcha. Now, as a family that my family are gamers and things like that. They are curious. They would like to know. I had to write it down. Do you have, or what is your favorite fictitious mythological religion, and by extension, deity? Like in The Sims, they have Jacobiism and things like that. And there's all the great ones in D&D. And do you have a favorite mythological religion?
I've played D&D essentially my whole life. Pretty much, I think I started in 4th or 5th grade, and I've been playing it since. I run a game for a group of clergy online, and strangely enough, no clerics, no clergy people actually among the characters in that game. But that all said, there's a book series called the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson.
Yes.
And one of the characters is a priest who is trying to preserve all of these different religions. He comes across a religion and he learns everything there is to know about it. And he ends up creating sort of an almost amalgamated religion that is about kind kindness, that is about serving others, that is about, and so I deeply identified with that character in that story, and also, I can't argue with the end result.
Brandon Sanderson is known and loved at our house as well. So I think my family I think my family would approve of your answer there, which is fantastic. I love that you use this for your project. To go, because were you a convention goer before? I assume before.
Yeah, I mean, so I grew up in these communities. I've been a lifelong nerd. I claim that. I own that proudly. I and I've related science fiction to my understanding of my faith since I was 7 years old. My mom gave me the book Dune when I was 7, because the main character was named Paul, and she just read it and loved it. And I was a bit of a precocious reader. So she said, here. And there was a lot in there that I didn't understand. But I got 2 things out of it. 1, water is precious. And 2, you can make religion say anything you want to. And so I went to my pastor because I was really bothered by that. And I said, pastor, this book says you can make religion say anything you want to. And he knelt down and he looked me square in the eyes and he said, that's right, which is why you have to learn how to read for yourself.
Wow.
And, I'm pretty sure there's a reason I went to seminary, and that moment is I think maybe the first step on the path.
I really appreciate, though, a pastor who is willing to, to take that step, to do something, not to just push it off as this is the way it is, or, this is a terrible thing. You shouldn't be involved in it. You shouldn't be reading it. There's so many times they're quick to tell you what you cannot do, but instead, he frames it in a completely different way.
I feel really fortunate. I grew up in a church where I was not just allowed, but I was expected to ask questions. And when I did ask questions, the way people responded was almost always like, well, here's what I think, and here's why I think this. And you should go talk to that person over there because they think differently. They didn't expect me to just accept an answer at face value. They wanted me to come up with my own answer. And that was really valuable. And a big part of what I think is important in ministry is building those spaces where we can ask big questions.
Yeah, because we make God too small when we say, no, this is only the way God can be. Yes, I agree. I mean, who are we to put limits on the Almighty and to say, no, you can't ask questions? Really? And I love that you were encouraged to do that. And I wish that more people were involved in churches that encouraged the questions, that didn't say, we have the answers and this is it. You cannot deviate, I think we'd be in a far better place. So why don't you tell us then a little bit about what your Hope Punk theology, that group is about?
Sure. So I believe it was 2017, Alexandra Rowland just posted something on Tumblr, and all it said was, the opposite of grim dark is hope punk, pass it on. And a bit later, she went ahead and she expanded that further, and she spoke a little bit about what she meant. So just real quick, the genre of grimdark is a pretty popular genre. It really became popular in the 90s when things were going really, really well overall for our country, economically. That's certainly not true for everybody, but as a rule, our economy was expanding, times were pretty good, and the genre of grimdark became very popular. In grimdark, you face it's a very gritty and realistic sort of setting. It's a setting that says that essentially people are always selfish and self-interested. If they're acting in positive ways, it's because they have hidden motives, and that things aren't going to get better, they're going to get worse. And that's kind of the way it goes. You can think of something like Game of Thrones as a great example of grimdark, right? Everybody's got their own motives, and generally the situation seems to deteriorate, not improve. And Hope Punk is kind of a reaction to that. But that being said, it's also something that had already existed. One of the things that caught, so I co-created the Hope Punk theology with the Reverend Mindy Welton Mitchell. I think she's actually the one who suggested it. She started that conversation between us. So, but one of the things that really interested us was when Alexandra Rowland was expanding on this idea. She said, so Hope Punk is essentially weaponized optimism and resistance to that grimness, to empire, to oppression, to that kind of thing. And she listed fictional examples and real world examples, and two caught our attention. She listed Jesus of Nazareth, and she listed the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King as Hope Punk figures, real world Hope Punk figures. One of the main concepts behind Hope Punk is that it is not that everything's going to be okay and that the world is already in a great place, but it accepts that sort of grim, dark idea that the world is a very difficult place. And then it says, and anything that you can do that makes that world better, even just a little bit, even those small acts of kindness, even those moments of standing up in resistance, even if they get washed away tomorrow, they matter.
Yeah.
And that's where you find meaning, right? And so that really caught our attention. We ended up writing a paper for the 2019 Theologians Conference, which happens right before the biennial, about Hope Punk theology. And it was fun. I mean, it's not many academic papers where you get to cite the Marvel Cinematic Universe and She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. We were giving our paper during the Theologians Conference, and we said, I'm sorry, we have to skip, due to time, we're going to skip our portion on the Guardians of the Galaxy. And from the back of the room, we heard, no! I guess we were on the right track.
Yeah.
The paper has been subsequently published in the American Baptist Quarterly last fall. It's listed as the spring 2020 issue, but due to COVID and other delays. And we've since presented the paper a couple more times at Doxicon Seattle and Doxicon Prime, which are conventions around the intersections of faith and fandom that were organized by the Greek Orthodox Church originally. So we presented at Doxicon in 2021. It was Doxicon Seattle in 2020 in November, and then Doxicon Prime in 2021. Doxicon Prime normally happens on the East Coast, but because of COVID, we were able to participate remotely. So that was great. We also started a Hope Punk theology gathering group. And originally we were a physically gathering group. We gathered here in Seattle at this coffee shop or that coffee shop, as one does. But when COVID started, we took it online. And we kind of have built it out as an online community from there, which turned out to be advantageous since Reverend Mindy has, as we have previously alluded, moved to Wisconsin. So this allows us to continue even though we're not gathering in the same physical place.
Did you find that with COVID that you had more people join your group? Did that change?
We did actually see, especially initially during COVID, we saw an uptick in participation, just as people were looking for hope in the face of the pandemic, and it's kind of tapered off somewhat now, but we're still an active group, and we are an interfaith group. From the beginning, our goal there was not just to lift up the Christian tradition. Even though Reverend Mindy and I are both American Baptist pastors and everything, we know that those same kind of hope punk ideals can be found in other faith traditions. And so we had a polytheist who joined us, and when we were originally gathering physically, and we have a rabbi who's a regular part of our online gatherings at this point as well. So, and we've had people who are Buddhist and of other faith traditions as well participate in that conversation. And
any Pastafarians in there?
Pastafarians, not that I know of, but there may have been some who just didn't specifically mention it.
That would have been interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's incredible though that here, you look at so often, we're like we feel like there are limits to what we can do, and you in so many places have created this space and a safe space for community and for people who believe differently, who don't believe at all, people who are just curious. And I think so much in our world, safe places like that are missing. So I appreciate you and all your ministries very much. So as we kind of think about wrapping things up, I wanted to ask you the question that I ask everyone about joy. So where in the midst, there are so many places, I think, but where in the midst of all your ministries do you find joy? Do you find hope?
So there are some people who look around and they see the decline of mainline denominations, and we're even seeing the decline of evangelicalism, and seeing church in general in decline. And some people say, well, I'm sorry, this is when you came out of seminary, it would have been better 20 years ago or 40 years ago. And I say, no, I graduated seminary at exactly the right time. I entered ministry at exactly the right time, because now is when we get to be part of what the church is going to become, right? We get to be the ones who are participating in what that conversation is, and how people of faith are going to continue to find good news going forward. And it may not look like what we've expected it to look like. It may not look like the church that gathers on Sunday and has their bake sales and does, it may not look exactly like that. It might be something radically different. And to me, that's really exciting to be part of that conversation, and to be able to say, here are the good things. Here are the things that we want to lift out of our tradition that we've been part of, that lift out of this traditional church model that's been our church model for the last 50, 100 years. Here's some good things that we want to make sure we don't lose in this transition, right? And so I'm excited to see what comes next. I think whatever the church is going to be, it's going to have to find a way to relate with the culture better. It's going to have to find a way to communicate its message better. And to that end, I'm currently working on a doctorate of ministry where I'm trying to help the church find ways to speak about and to use pop culture in ways that are both ethical and appropriate to communicate its message to the larger world. There are some churches that are already doing that well, and there are some churches that would hate to do that, and I think there's a balance to be struck there.
You are like incredibly interesting. I've just enjoyed this conversation, and I love just how open you are, and your willingness to serve, in so many different ways, and again to not put limits on your faith and your calling just because of the way the world happens to be today. So, um, Reverend Paul Schneider, I am just so grateful for you joining me today. Um, I pray blessings upon you and all your ministries as you continue. Um, this has been Ministry Monday with Meg, and I'm Meg, Reverend Meg Biddle, and I'm with the American Baptist Home Mission Society. You can catch Ministry Mondays with Meg at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Facebook at ABHMS Facebook page, at the Judson Press Facebook page, and on YouTube at the ABHMS YouTube channel. Again, Paul, thank you so much for joining me.
Truly my pleasure. Thanks for having the conversation with me, and I look forward to having another one.
I do as well.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks for watching.